Serum 2 is a professional Wavetable synthesizer plugin made by Xfer Records. Its main power comes from Wavetable oscillators. Instead of simple fixed shapes like a basic saw or square wave, it uses entire tables of hundreds of single-cycle waveforms that you can scan through. This lets you be very creative when designing sounds. Clicking here lets readjust the user interface. The tabs are Oscillator, Mix, Effects, Matrix, and Global, which I'll go through one by one. This is the current preset. Click to load presets. This opens the preset library. This lets you save a preset. This lets you undo or redo any change in the plugin. The main knob adjusts the master output volume for the entire plugin. In the Oscillator tab, you have your sound generators and processors. The green dot means the module is active. This is Oscillator A. The same options apply to the other two oscillators. This lets you pick a sound generation option. Wavetable produces an evolving soundscape by cycling through multiple waveforms stored in a wavetable. Multisample uses samples of instruments or other sound generators. Sample uses single samples that can be played back with various effects. Granular modulates tiny sound fragments called grains to create new sound textures. Spectral manipulates sound by analyzing and resynthesizing the frequency spectrum, creating new sounds with independent control. Here you can choose which oscillator to work with. The arrows let you navigate to the next menu option. You can alter the pitch of the waveform by an octave, a semitone, fine-tuning in sense, and coarse. This lets you route the signal from any oscillator or filter to a range of targets. Filter will route the signal to either filter 1 or 2 by varying degrees. Main will route the signal to the main output, passing through the effects section. Direct will bypass the filter and effects section and play clean. None will route the signal to no output path. Use this when you want to use the oscillator as a modulation source only. You can also send the signal to the two buses. Clicking on the waveform switches the view between 2D and 3D. The small pencil lets you take a closer look at the waveform. This number tells you the current position of the waveform. This lets you adjust the phase to specify where the oscillator begins playing back when a note is played. This lets you adjust the amount of randomness of the phase on each new note. This menu lets you specify the phase memory. The phase memory specifies how phase and phase randomization should be determined for new notes. All voices use both phase and random settings for all notes. In contiguous, new notes continue with the phase of the previous note. In per voice, new notes start with the same phase each time. The Wavetable position knob lets you set the starting position within the wavetable. Unison lets you set the number of voices by stacking multiple notes of the same pitch but slightly detuned. 16 is the max. The gear icon allows you to adjust the unison settings. Mode controls the type of detune. Linear detuning spaces each additional unison voice evenly in frequency, creating a consistent spread away from the root pitch. Produces a smooth texture that feels thick yet natural. Super applies slight detuning across voices with a special emphasis on density and power, while adding a subtle stereo spread. It creates lush, wide, and full-bodied sounds. Exponential makes the detuning grow wider and more dramatic as voices move away from the center pitch. This creates aggressive and high-impact textures that cut through a mix. Invert mode inverts the detuning behavior so that lower voices are detuned more sharply than higher ones, creating an asymmetrical spread. This produces interesting phasing effects that feel less predictable than standard detuning. Random mode applies unpredictable detuning to each unison voice instead of evenly spaced intervals. This creates a more chaotic and less polished sound that's ideal for experimental textures. Stack lets you adjust how the unison voices are stacked, which means they can be transposed or harmonically adjusted instead of remaining at the same pitch. Width controls how far the unison voices are spread across the stereo field. Range sets the overall amount of pitch detuning applied to the unison voices, determining how far they spread around the central frequency. At low settings, there is a subtle chorusing effect. This is the wavetable frame that the unison voice plays at a particular moment. Warp 1 and 2 allow you to adjust the warp amount applied to their correlating warp knob positions. Detune allows you to specify the tuning offset for each additional voice. The blend knob lets you adjust the dry and wet mix between the dry non-unison voice and the wet unison voice. Warp allows you to manipulate the sound of the oscillator. Clicking here allows you to browse through different warp modes, and the arrows let you switch to the adjacent mode. The pan knob allows you to control the placement of the oscillator in the stereo field. Level controls the output volume of the oscillator. Switching over to the multisample sound generation option, you start by picking an instrument. You can switch the viewing mode by clicking on the waveform. Click on this icon to modify the sound's envelope. Delay sets the time before the envelope begins after a note is triggered. Attack controls how long it takes for the sound to rise from silence to its maximum level after a note is triggered. Hold determines how long the sound stays at its peak level after the attack phase before moving into decay. Decay sets the time it takes for the sound to fall from its maximum level to the sustain level. Sustain sets the steady volume level the sound holds at after the decay phase as long as the note is held down. Release controls how long it takes for the sound to fade completely to silence after the note is released. Velocity track controls the sensitivity of the note velocity. Random randomizes the initial phase of the sample. The timbre knob adjusts multisample timbre. It reverses the normal pitch relationship. Higher notes now trigger lower-pitched samples, and lower notes trigger higher-pitched ones. The rest of the controls are the same as in Wavetable mode. Switching over to the Sample Sound Generation option, start by picking or loading a sample. Clicking and dragging the ends of the sample allows you to adjust the start and end points. Right-click the sample to select an option that manipulates or slices the sample in whatever way you see fit. This menu allows you to choose the loop mode for the sample. You can set the loop start and end points either by dragging markers or by setting values in the LS and LE fields. Click and drag this icon to set a crossfade on a sample loop, to create smoother transitions at the loop points of the audio sample. The Scan knob lets you adjust the speed and direction of the sample playback. The rest of the controls are the same. In granular synthesis mode, you can manipulate audio samples by breaking them down into tiny segments or grains. As with sample mode, you can adjust the start and end of the sample by clicking and dragging the ends. Also, adjust loop parameters by right-clicking the sample. Specify the loop mode in this box, and the crossfade with this icon. This icon lets you adjust grain amplitude settings. Amount sets the overall influence of the window curve and lets you add per-grain randomization. Skew sets the window skew and lets you add per-grain randomization to the skew amount. Shape selects the grain window shape, with a visual representation of the chosen shape shown. The shape of each grain determines how its volume evolves over time. Unison is the same as before. Warp is the same. Scan controls how quickly the plugin moves through the audio sample to generate grains. Density sets the rate at which grains are spawned. Right-click for more options. Length sets the duration of each grain fragment. Pan sets the placement of the sample in the stereo field. Level sets the output volume of the oscillator. The bottom row lets you adjust the grain randomization parameters. Spectral synthesis mode generates sound by analyzing and manipulating the frequency spectrum and individual partials of a sound to give precise control over timbre and evolution. When you pick or load a sample, its spectral representation is shown here. Click and drag to zoom the display. As with sample mode, you can adjust the start and end of the sample by clicking and dragging the ends. You can set the high and low frequency points by dragging the markers to the right. Right-click to change its filter type. Also, adjust loop parameters by right-clicking the sample. Crossfade, loop mode, and unison are all the same as before. The cut knob sets the cutoff of the filter. Here you can create a custom filter curve, choose a filter preset, or choose a wavetable to act as the filter. Use Mix to control the balance between the wet and dry signal. The sub-oscillator adds depth and weight to the low end of your sound. Use octave and coarse to alter the pitch. You can choose between 6 different waveforms here, then adjust its phase, pan, and output level. The noise oscillator lets you choose from a wide array of samples to add depth and texture to your sound. Click here to choose a sample. This lets you choose whether the noise sample loops or one-shots. Start controls the percentage of the phase start. Random randomizes the start phase. Pitch controls the bass pitch. Fine adjusts fine tuning. Pan controls placement in the stereo field. Level controls output volume. The filter module delivers per-voice filtering on one or more oscillators, letting you shape and sculpt sound by selectively cutting or boosting frequencies. To route an oscillator to a filter module, select one of these switches. Click here or use the arrows to choose a filter type. Right-click the field to set the display options for the filter. The cutoff knob sets the primary cutoff frequency for the filter. Use the piano switch to offset the cutoff using notes. This adjusts the resonance of the filter. You can also adjust this directly on the graph. The drive knob adjusts the gain into the filter module. This knob sets a variation on the filter. The pan knob creates a cutoff offset for the left and right signals. The mix knob controls the wet and dry amount for the filter. The level slider adjusts the filter output level. The envelope module offers 4 modulation sources labeled here. To start, click one of the envelope tabs. Click and drag this icon to the parameter in which you want to control. This number shows how many parameters this envelope is controlling. Then modify the shape directly on the graph here, or alternatively by adjusting the attack, hold, decay, sustain, and release knobs below. This icon will lock the envelope, preventing further modification. You can click and drag here to zoom in or out on the envelope. BPM will show subdivisions of a note, and MS will show milliseconds. You can right-click on the grid to select whether the vertical lines on the grid are placed in time or beat intervals. The LFO module offers 10 LFO tabs with their own set of controls. Only 6 are visible now. The other 4 appear when all 6 are being utilized. To start, click one of the LFO tabs. Click and drag this icon to the parameter in which you want to control. When you link a parameter to an LFO, this blue ring around the knob appears. This is the range in which the LFO modulates that parameter. You can adjust by clicking and dragging the parameter. This number shows how many parameters this LFO is modulating. You can modify the graph directly using your mouse, or change the drawing tool here for more customization. The point lets you manipulate points on the graph, add new points, and adjust curves. The flat line lets you add flat lines between points based on the grid size. The slope up places a ramp up between points. The slope down places a ramp down between points. This icon opens the grid in a larger window. This menu allows you to choose from one of 5 LFO types. This section defines how the LFO behaves when a note is played. Free follows the host clock and ignores note timing. Retrig re-triggers the LFO every new note. Envelope is similar to retrig, except the LFO will play through a single cycle before stopping. You can create a loop on the LFO directly by right-clicking the grid. The mono button lets you switch the LFO between polyphonic mode, where each voice receives independent modulation, and monophonic mode, where the same modulation is applied to all voices. This menu allows you to choose an LFO shape from a preset list. You can also save new ones here. This chooses the direction of the LFO. There's forward, reverse, and ping pong. These allow you to choose the number of grid lines displayed in the background. The host button specifies whether the LFO is synced to the song position. This decides whether the time is set to tempo-based units or free time. Rate sets the playback speed of the LFO. These set triplet and dotted time on the rate control respectively, useful for avoiding triplet or dotted times when automating the LFO rate. The rise knob sets the amount of time the LFO shape will have influence over the output, useful if you want the LFO to slowly influence your sound. Delay controls the amount of time before the rise begins. Smooth smooths the LFO output, useful for avoiding abrupt jumps in the output. Phase sets the start position on the LFO grid. This module lets you modulate any parameter using MIDI velocity and note values. As with the envelope and LFO modules, you can click and drag this icon to any parameter to modulate it. You can also draw directly on the graph. The bottom right corner contains the voicing section. Contains controls that allow you to change how Serum behaves when multiple notes play at once. When enabled, the mono switch allows only one active note to be played at a time. When legato is enabled, envelopes do not re-trigger, creating smooth changes when switching notes. Use poly to specify the number of simultaneous notes that can be played. This shows the number of voices playing over the number of voices allowed. Below the voicing are the portamento settings. It creates a slow glide or pitch blend from one note to another, useful when mono is enabled. The porta knob controls the rate of glide from one note to another. The curve adjusts the contour of glide from one note to another. When always is enabled, portamento occurs on a new note, even if no note is currently playing. The scaled switch adjusts the portamento rate based on the pitch distance between 2 consecutive notes, useful for melodic leads. This module features 8 macros that let you control multiple parameters simultaneously. As with the previous modules, click and drag to multiple parameters. You can also assign the macro knobs as a destination for an LFO or envelope. The Clips module allows you to play a series of MIDI clips within Serum. You can load a preset in this box, with 12 available slots on this row. In mono, you can only trigger one clip at a time. In poly, you can trigger multiple. Enable Edit All to adjust parameters for all clips simultaneously. You can add and edit notes directly on the piano roll. This is the current clip you are working with. This displays the length of the clip in bars, beats, and 16th notes. KB Span decides how MIDI notes from your keyboard trigger and play the clip. Mono and poly play the clip at whatever pitch you press on the keyboard. In offset, each different key you press starts the clip from a different spot in the audio. Off turns the whole keyboard off so the clip plays normally. Trans transposes the clip by semitones. Mode controls the play mode for the clip, specifying how the playhead moves. Rate controls the speed at which the clip plays. Launch Quantize sets the interval at which clips sync to the clock. Retrig specifies whether the clip restarts when played or immediately syncs to the clock. Velocity Trig sets whether note velocities in a clip are scaled by the incoming note velocity. Note Gate specifies whether a note off message stops playing a clip when triggered by note inputs. You can record here by either overdubbing the existing recording or extending the current. This button plays the clip. This icon activates the metronome. You can route the MIDI notes to another output or instrument track here. You can assign macros to the clip module here. In the Arpeggiator module, Bank lets you switch between different saved ARP patterns. Launch Quantization, set the duration before starting the pattern. Edit All lets you quickly edit every step in the pattern at once. Shape determines the order in which the notes play. Rate sets the speed of the arpeggiator, which can be synced to either the BPM or free time. These set the rhythm to either triplets or dotted notes. Transpose sets the overall transposition mode for the pattern. This shifts the pattern up or down in semitones. Range sets how many extra octaves the ARP will jump across. When latch is on, the arpeggiator keeps playing even after you release the keys. When through is on, the original notes pass through in addition to the arpeggiated notes. Offset sets the starting point for the pattern, forward or backwards in time. Repeats sets the number of times a pattern repeats before stopping. Gate shortens or lengthens each note. Chance sets the random probability that each note plays. Launch re-triggers the arpeggiator every time you press a new key. Rate sets the interval for how fast the arpeggiator is re-triggered. Note re-triggers incoming notes. First only re-triggers the arpeggiator on the first note. The retrig switch here resets the velocity and decay value back to the incoming velocities. Decay sets the speed at which the velocities are changed. The target knob sets the velocity towards which the decay setting moves. You can transpose the keyboard up or down by semitones here. You can set the key and scale of the keyboard here. Swing lets you apply swing to certain notes to add groove. You can map the oscillators to the keyboard by clicking here and adjusting their mapping. The Mixer tab lets you blend and balance all the core sound sources in your patch, including the sub-oscillator, oscillator A, B, C, noise oscillator, the outputs of filter 1 and filter 2, plus 2 internal buses. It gives you precise control over volume, pan, and routing for each element. This lets you choose where the oscillator or filter is routed to. When main is selected, this icon appears. When enabled, the oscillator output level is affected by envelope 1. To send an oscillator signal to a bus, click and adjust the corresponding knob. Pan and level are self-explanatory at this point. This icon lets you bypass an effect. This tab is the Effects tab. Click this icon to expand the view. There are 3 effects racks: Main, Bus 1, and Bus 2. Each rack processes the signal on the corresponding channel. Click here to choose from a list of presets. Click here to add an effects module to the list. Signal flow is top to bottom. Click and drag the names or boxes to rearrange the order of effects. You can copy and paste effects by holding Alt or Option, then dragging the effect to another spot when you see a yellow line. Click this to bypass a module, and this to remove it. Click this to save a rack as a preset. You can modulate most parameters in the Effects tab the same way you would any other control. Click and drag an envelope or LFO to the desired control. Bode is an effect that shifts the frequency of an audio signal by a fixed amount. Mono routes mono input into the module. Shift adjusts the percentage of the pitch shift range. Range adjusts the range of the shift. Direction adjusts the direction of the shift. When used in conjunction with direction, width specifies whether both or single channels are used. This knob controls delay time. This button controls if the delay time is synced to the BPM. Feed controls the amount of delay fed back into the module, which produces pitched delays. Balance controls the delay input mix between a down and upshifted signal. Blur creates chorus and flutter effects. Mix controls the wet-dry balance. Level controls the output volume. The chorus effect has 4 voices. The knob controls the rate of the chorus, which depends on the BPM. The BPM switch controls whether the chorus is synced to the BPM. Delay 1 controls the amount of delay between the dry signal and first pair of chorus voices. Delay 2 controls the second pair of chorus voices. Depth controls how much of the chorus LFO modulates the delay times. Feedback controls the amount of feedback in the chorus voices, which creates a ringing sound to the chorus. This controls the cutoff frequency of the low or high-pass filter. Click here to switch filter types. Mix and level are the same. The compressor module lets you pick one of 2 modes, single or multiband. Single affects the entire frequency spectrum, and multiband divides the spectrum into frequency bands to compress precise sections of the audio spectrum. Threshold sets the level at which the compressor starts working. Ratio controls the strength of the gain reduction. Attack sets the amount of time before gain reduction starts. A longer attack allows the sound to punch through. Release sets the amount of time before the compression is removed. Gain controls the makeup gain after compression. These controls are enabled in multiband mode. X low sets the low crossover on the frequency band. Below sets the compression ratio. X high sets the high crossover on the frequency band. H sets the high band gain. M sets mid-band gain. L sets the low band gain. Mix and level are the same. The convolve module applies an impulse response representing the acoustic characteristics of a room's reverb directly to your sound. Click here to choose from a list of impulse responses. The size knob sets the size in which to stretch or contract the impulse. The tone knob controls the filter on the impulse. This switch converts the impulse to a minimum phase representation, basically keeps the frequency response the same in eliminating echoes. The pre-delay knob sets the amount of time before the initial impulse. Use this switch to sync the pre-delay to the BPM. Attack controls the fade of the impulse. Decay is used to shorten the impulse. Damp shortens the high frequency of the impulse. IR gain sets the impulse volume. Mix and level are the same. Delay gives your sound an echo. Click here to set the type of delay. These are for both the left and right channels. The number here sets the base delay time for the channel. The lower box applies an offset to that base time. This switch sets whether delay times are tempo-based or in milliseconds. The link switch keeps both left and right delay times the same. Feedback controls how long the delay echoes last. Frequency sets the frequency cutoff for the delay filter. Q sets the amount of bandwidth for the delay filter. You can set these 2 controls by manipulating the graph here. This is the distortion module. You can choose 13 different types of distortion here. Here you can choose whether the filtering occurs before distortion or after. You can adjust the filter by manipulating the graph and the slider. Frequency controls the cutoff, and Q controls the resonance. Drive sets the amount of gain for the distortion. You can also set it by manipulating the graph. Mix and level are the same. The equalizer module is a 2-band parametric equalizer. The frequency knobs control the cutoff frequency. Q controls the resonance for the band. Gain boosts or cuts the frequency band. You can select the filter type by clicking one of these 3 options. The filter module operates the same as the filter found on the oscillator tab, except this one runs as a master effect. The flanger module works by varying phase shift into a copy of the original signal and recombining them. Rate controls the rate of the flanger. When BPM is on, it snaps to musical time, from 8 bars to a 30-second note. Depth controls how much the flanger's LFO influences the sound. Feedback sets the amount of feedback in the circuit, creates a ringing effect. Phase sets the phase offset for the flanger's LFO. The hyper/dimension module is a micro-delay chorus with a variable number of voices. Rate controls the speed at which the voices oscillate in pitch. Unison is the number of chorus voices. Detune controls the depth of the voice oscillations. When this is turned on, it resets all voices to start over from a 0 pitch offset, creates a laser-like zap effect. Size adds extra layers of phase delays to the sound. The phaser modulates a signal by creating peaks and troughs in the frequency spectrum. Rate controls the rate of the phaser. When BPM is on, it is synced to the track's musical time. The higher the number of phaser poles, the more complex the sound. Depth controls how much the phaser LFO influences the sound. Depth 2 controls the offset between phaser stages. Frequency sets the base frequency for the effect. Feedback will add a ringing sound to the effect. Phase controls the phase offset for the LFO influence over the module. The reverb module has 5 types of reverb that all have different parameters. All 5 have a filter in which you can adjust the frequencies of the reverb. All 5 modes have size, which controls the length of the reverb, and pre-delay, which controls the offset time for the reverb. In plate mode, damp acts as another high-frequency cut for the reverb. Width widens the stereo width of the reverb. In Hall mode, decay controls how much decay time there is in the reverb. Spin rate controls the speed of the module's LFO. Spin depth modulates time differences to give movement to the reverb. In vintage mode, ER size sets the length of the first reverb reflection. Diffusion A sets the amount of diffusion in the reverb. Diffusion B damps the amount of diffusion. Chorus rate sets the speed of the reverb modulation. Chorus depth sets the pitch depth of the modulation. In nitrous mode, feedback sets the amount of reverb fed back into the input. You can choose from 5 different nitrous modes in this menu. Basin mode offers similar features as previously covered modes. Splitter LH divides the signal into low and high frequency bands, which allows you to apply different effects for each band. The knob in the middle sets the crossover frequency for the bands. Splitter LMH does the same thing, but for 3 definable frequency bands. Splitter MS divides the audio signal into mid and side bands and allows you to add effects to either one. The utility module offers various functions. Polarity will invert the polarity of either the right or left channel. This is a low-pass filter, and this is a high-pass filter. This switch converts all frequencies below the number set by this knob to be monophonic. Width controls the stereo width, and pan controls stereo balance. The Matrix tab shows all configured modulations as a list. This column shows the modulation sources. Curve is used to scale the modulation source to respond in a customizable way. The amount slider controls the modulation depth. Moving it to the left sets it to a negative value, which inverts the output. Polarity specifies whether the modulation is one-directional or bidirectional. The destination column shows the modulation destination. This box shows a graph which contains the shape of the modulation output. The auxiliary source is a secondary source to determine the amount of modulation. Invert inverts the auxiliary source with the source signal. Curve scales the auxiliary source signal. Output scales the final modulation output. This bypasses the row of modulation in the matrix. This removes the row from the matrix. The Global tab has options that affect the entire plugin. Help Tooltips displays tips when hovering your mouse over a control. Param Value Tooltips displays the values when modifying a value. Double-click Param sets whether double-clicking a control resets the parameter to the default value or displays a pop-up box allowing you to type in a value. Mouse Wheel Param Control lets the mouse wheel adjust values when hovering over a parameter. Keyboard Shortcuts lets you use keyboard shortcuts in Serum. Default Waveform View sets the default oscillator view to 2D or 3D. MPE enabled by default gives you per-note expressive control instead of the usual channel-wide modulation. MPE Pitch Bend enables controllers that send pitch bend for X-axis gestures also map those movements to note expression X. MPE Express Y sets whether the Y-axis is treated as unipolar or bipolar. Limit Mod Depth on Drop sets it so when you drop a modulator onto a knob, Serum automatically reduces the modulation depth if needed, so the modulated value never exceeds the knob's maximum. For example, dragging a modulator to an oscillator level set at 75% limits the depth to only 25%, so full modulation reaches exactly 100%. Silence Note mutes effects and notes when the DAW is stopped. Load MIDI Map from presets causes Serum to load MIDI CC mapping that was saved with the preset, and not the default. Use Ultra Quality when rendering instructs Serum to perform an offline render using Ultra Quality mode. and makes the highest quality playback of the rendered sound. Automatically check for updates and automatically delete renders after 30 days is self-explanatory. Voice control in Serum lets you add movement and variation across your Unison voices. On the left, Random adds subtle chaos to parameters and the step sequencer. The grid on the right shows the current sequencer values for the chosen oscillator on top. At the bottom, Scaling lets you adjust how strongly the envelopes and LFOs affect all the Unison voices together. It's a quick way to make your sound wider and less static without using the full modulation matrix. This specifies the level of quality of oversampling in Serum. Clicking this preserves sonic quality when you load a preset from Serum 1. This option disables automation parameter smoothing. This sets the master tuning, or you can load a tuning file here.